My friends, let us come together to celebrate, for humanity is levelling up. Whilst there's a pandemic raging and economic collapse round the corner, Ben Shapiro and Candace Owens put the priority on things that really matter the most by responding to a fashion shoot with Harry Styles wearing effeminate clothing and defending male masculinity for men around the world. And you have internet warriors typing away angrily on their keyboards, rejecting and boycotting Sainsbury's for featuring an all-black family in one of their advertisements. Humanity has been restored. I mean, seriously, what the fuck, guys?
With regards to the content in question of Harry Styles wearing so-called effeminate or unmanly clothing, I mean, this is really a ridiculous kind of conversation, considering that it's 2020. I mean, let people just wear what they want. Here's the content in question, the offending content. Vogue magazine with Harry Styles wearing, on the left, it's hard to say whether that's feminine or not, but on the right he's wearing kind of a dress, as you can see, and the blazer. And I mean, he's not even particularly endorsing it even. He's just, there's a quote from him saying, "There's so much joy to be had in playing with clothes. I never thought too much about what it means. It just becomes an extended part of creating something." So clearly he's doing something creative here for a fashion magazine. And this is absolutely fucking not new. We've come to kind of the fashion styles throughout the ages. And Candace Owens, somebody who's particularly disdainful of anything liberal since she jumped on this conservative bandwagon. She hasn't always been conservative, but she knows she can make more money being conservative. Not that that's a particularly good argument against what she's trying to say, because there's better arguments. You can just tackle the argument itself. She says, because there's so many flaws, so many inaccuracies. She says there is no society that can survive without strong men. There's nothing in that photo shoot that suggests that there isn't strength. Strength isn't a costume that you wear. The East knows this. Now, as we're going to talk about, kind of the whole idea of metrosexual kind of clothing and lifestyle is very much embraced by the Far East, especially Japan, South Korea, as we all see. In the West, the steady feminization of our men at the same time that Marxism is being taught to our children is not a coincidence. Now, Marxism, if you look at most socialist Marxist countries, or those who are recently purely socialist, like Russia, the Eastern Europe, they are very, very strong. They can find some agreement with Candace Owens on this. There's a cultural aspect that is residual there, as opposed to more progressive countries, Western Europe countries, in South Korea, for example, which is more progressive, I would argue, than America. And she says, bring back manly men. Now, obviously, complete inaccurate tweet, a lie, and it's just basically reactionary thinking. Whilst progressives are like, just c'est la vie, just let people be, Ben Shapiro, as we will find, and I agree, Marianne Williamson, that is one of the weirdest tweets to equate a fashion shoot with Marxism being taught to children. It's just ridiculous. These are the people that are saying, Candace Owens, for example, and Ben Shapiro saying that Black Lives Matter is a Marxist movement. Ridiculous. Any kind of insistence of any kind of equality is considered Marxism. And then we're going to find, actually, go back to my profile. I've got this retweet of a dunk on Ben Shapiro. Now, Ben Shapiro responded to Candace Owens saying, masculinity and femininity exist. Outward indicators of masculinity and femininity exist in nearly every... Say the stereotypical indicators do exist, although probably not in every culture, because of course I'm sure there are many thousands of tribes that don't have a very particularly obvious, that Americanized, pump up your chest kind of masculinity. Boys are taught to be more masculine in virtually every human culture because of the role of men, and always the same as the role of women. Now, nothing in that kind of the photo shoot that suggests that the roles have been changed. It's just a really creative expression to let people just be. There was a particularly good dunk on Ben Shapiro by Hassan Piker, somebody on the progressive left, somebody I don't always agree with, but a comrade for a progressive cause. He says, Ben, you're 5'3", can't grow facial hair, and weigh 100 pounds soaking wet. He is quite short, actually. Not that it's anything against him, as we all see, in terms of him being a masculine man. It hasn't, and height has really nothing to do with your masculinity. If we can both be considered men, you should probably be a little bit more open-minded about gender expressions. It's clearly not as rigid a binary as you try to imply it is, and that's true. It takes a little bit of kind of introspection to realize that true masculinity, or masculinity it's not just a catch-all term. It has to represent something, and I think we can all agree that something like aggression or competitiveness are kind of masculine terms, masculine kind of traits, and there's nothing in that photo shoot that suggests otherwise. As I'm going to say, time and time again, it's the fight, the dog, not the dog in the fight. It's all about what's within you, and because the society is so fixated on the superficial, on the outward appearance, it's very easy for people like Ben Shapiro or Candace Owens to just polarize opinion based on such superficial aspects of somebody's expression, when really society needs to actually turn within. Now here's the offending video in question from Sainsbury's, featuring an all-black family. I mean, seriously, and you can just tell just by the number of replies, and we'll have a look at the actual negative replies shortly. But here's one particular video on their Twitter profile, and a day later here's another one, all white family. Now it's interesting, the right-wing populists had no problem with an all-white family, and as we'll see, a huge problem with the black family, and I'm sure the Lawrence Fox brigade, and even though he's not mentioned anything on it because he's a coward, he believes in the hierarchy of racism. Now if there was a Sikh family, perhaps he would consider it a forced diversity, but considering that there is certain ethnic groups have more political power, and therefore it would be against his cause to try and antagonize these groups. It's easy to just pick on the smaller groups, those with lesser power, the Muslims, the Sikhs, Yeah, a day later, an all-white family. And just look at their profile. Another one here, let's have a look. Oh, another all-white family. Oh, white people here. And in the next video you'll see, next slide you'll see the kind of tweets of from people from the right, from the far right, from I'm sure Lawrence Fox followers, even though he hasn't explicitly said anything wrong with it, considering that he's a coward.
I know we have this lockdown, and it does have a bearing on our mental health. It appears that whilst Trump has been kicked out, and that's possibly good news if you have any sense of empathy, it appears that the Conservatives are reigniting a cultural trope in order to act as a lightning rod to bring more people to their side of the political sphere. And you have this movement of, it's anti-wokeness, and whilst of course woke corporatism, hashtag BLM from large scale corporations that they have nothing better to do than to just improve the very superficial aspect of their business without actually looking at the way their business is run and how unequal it is, how their push for lower taxation actually has a negative bearing on how public money is sourced from the government. The harder that corporations push for lower taxation is the harder the government has to actually scrape for money for public services such as the NHS or community services that benefit a community of disenfranchised, minorities and people working class. Yes, I understand that, but at the same time, this is nothing new. Diversity on film, on advertising, this is nothing new. And also, the whole trope of males wearing effeminate clothing, this is also nothing new, and it also has nothing really to do with masculinity. Let's go back to Mozart wearing these effeminate wigs in the West, and even recently you have David Bowie wearing dresses and mascara, and never once has it actually diminished his masculinity. You have Eddie Izzard, you have straight males even wearing dresses, and even though I'm not so inclined to wear dresses myself, we are in 2020. I think we should give people the freedom to choose what they want, and just the fact that these people are just clamoring, just desperate for attention, just goes to show that they are losing the battle of ideas. And Candace Owens, with her very disingenuous remark saying that looks to the East for better understanding of masculinity. Does she not know that the Far East are far more open with metrosexual clothing? They're more, open with, more happy to accept a man, for example, holding a man bag, and just look to their rock bands with more, they're just more open beyond this kind of this binary, this very clear binary of men just pumping up their chests, growing hair on their chin, which is ironic because Ben Shapiro cannot grow facial hair, and he's 5'4", even though that really has no bearing also on masculinity either. And in my future videos, I'm going to talk about how masculinity actually has nothing to do with how you appear in the flesh, or rather how you actually go about your inner world, because that will determine whether you are actually, whether you're a fighter or not. It's not the dog in the fight, it's the fight in the dog. And this is basic stuff. And so this whole and also the East hasn't just recently become metrosexual. I mean, the whole idea of samurais wearing really loose robes, almost indistinguishable from geisha, and yet they didn't have a crisis of masculinity. They were the baddest warriors in the land. So this whole trope is a kind of a lightning rod for these conservatives to harp on about certain issues, just to bring attention to something that is not so clear cut. And the whole idea that progressives or the left are pushing this notion of effeminate clothing, this is also ridiculous. I mean, Dwayne Johnson recently supported Biden, who a lot of conservatives say is a left-winger, and yet Dwayne Johnson is perhaps one of the most obvious examples of male masculinity in terms of very obviously that stereotypical male, but he's also I'll bet open to the idea that there are men who have different appearances, different ways of expressing themselves in the world, and it doesn't make you any less a man. More on this in future videos.